A very rustic tree tends to use a much more rustic stand. As you can see here, stands basically, we've got, I guess I'll start with these, are just some typical stands. They can be plain, they can be, I guess you can go from this, which is a fairly plain stand, you can go from something that's actually like that, that's basically just a floor mat that's cut up, just something to set off the tree. Just, something like this, which is it's plain, you're getting a little bit more, and then you're going to more ornate, the more carving you've got, to just something like this, which has a lot of carving in that. Basically, what you're looking for is a stand that suits the tree. It lifts it up, it separates it. In traditional Japanese society, I guess what you've got is a tokonoma, which is a display section. It tends to be 1 tatami mat deep, so roughly that deep, and about 1.5 meters long or something about that long. And that's used as a display area in the traditional Japanese home. They're often then displayed with a hanging scroll, a tree on stand, and then a zoe beside it. And they're based on, they'll be changed in the seasons. So in fall, you might have a tree, in fall colors. In winter, you might have a tree that's defoliated, it's lost its leaves, it's deciduous, or a black pine or something, but you would have the scroll that matches it with depicting the season as well. But other than that, basically it's just to set off the tree and to, make it, just bring it up and make it more visible and that. So you're looking for something that complements the pot. So the pot you use, the stand, all go together to create a picture or a story. I don't know, other than that, I can't say a lot. There's different, height, there's tall pot stands for cascades, there's
just on a mental note, if you display an Australian native, you cannot display an Oriental table with it. Like you cannot put an Australian native on an Oriental stand. So you can display it with a piece of plank wood. I've got like a lot of fence paling.
Yeah.
Bark of a tree, or just an ordinary table. Because it doesn't go with Australian native, it does not go with Oriental table.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that's matching up the tree to the stand.
Yeah.
So if you have a very, Australian natives tend to be, I guess,
rugged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you want much more rustic, open form stand for it.
That's right.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, I'm no expert on stands.
That's right.
I think another one is cascades and semi-cascades. You want to lift the tree up as high as you can to present the front. Otherwise, you have a tree with the bottom of the rest of the table.
Yeah, I guess you don't want your cascade where the bottom branch is actually resting on the table, and so just by putting it on a tall stand, it lifts it up and sets it off. The other thing is you don't need to have a fancy stand. You go to IKEA, you can find computer desktop wooden stands or something, bed, the ones that you sit in bed and there's a stand or something that you put over you or something. Some of those are made out of bamboo or something like that. You can have something like that. I use the doormat. I went to IKEA. If you have a lot of trees that you're showing at the show, you may not have, 12 different stands. or you may not have the right type of stand. So just setting it off any way you can, and it doesn't have to be super expensive, but a beautiful stand will set off your tree.
Thanks, Ryan. Zoes or accent plants. Come in. A bit like stands in that they're used mostly for formal display, and they are meant, if you look up the definition of Zoe, it's supposed to show or give some relationship of the tree to where it comes from, the environment or the area. It can be a plant, a tree, or a piece of moss. It can be any type of botanical thing. It can even be a rock. I think one of the pictures there, I tried to find a variety of pictures, one down the bottom left. The next one over, I'm not sure whether that's a Zoe or the next tree next to it, because there are some guidelines for what makes a good Zoe. I said you can use anything, and I don't display all that much, but I do like the idea of growing little Zoes. You can collect almost anything. Some of these are what are they called? Fishbone ferns. This is a little Australian orchid. It has a very beautiful flower when it comes out every now and again. It can be an annual, so these are little, no, they're not petunias, they're something like that. And they're only good while ever they stay small, because in 3 or 4 months' time it'll be 10 inches wide. It can be fern. I've got 3 or 4 different maidenhair ferns. I like maidenhair fern for a Zoe because you can train them to be very small. With all the rain we've had lately, I went to collect some to bring in, and I found that they'd all gone mad. I spent a lot of time cutting them back. I did have some very, very tiny maidenhair ferns in a very little container, and they look really cute. The ones I brought in tonight are a bit bigger, but they still look fine. So they need to be in proportion to the tree. They should not detract from the tree, but they should supplement or complement the tree. Where you place the Zoe is important. It should not be placed directly in front of the tree or directly beside the tree, but usually offset in front. There should be some proportion between the tree and the size of the Zoe. You can have a tree as a Zoe. There's nothing in the rules that says you can't. And yet the one that is a little tree to the bigger tree, I don't think complements it. I think it detracts from the bigger tree. Now, that's my personal opinion, and that usually doesn't matter. I've got some little, that's a little apple seed, which is now 2 years old, but because it's in a pot, it's not growing, a tiny pot, it's not growing very quickly, but it's a rather cute little thing and could easily be a Zoe. This is simply rocks and moss, and about a month ago when I decided to try and put some Zoes together, this is the only one I created especially for this meeting, and I thought with all the rain we had it would be beautiful lush green moss. It's not bad, but it's not as spectacular as I was hoping it would be, but it's an example of, for the right tree to complement, could be a rather nice Zoe. This is a weed, and it's now about 4 or 5 years old, so it's not the sort of weed that is annual. And the biggest problem is that it comes up with covered in seeds. So the biggest problem I've got is cutting all the seeds off because it's a weed, and if I'm not careful, the whole yard will be filled with these. But it looks quite interesting. It's getting on a bit. I just realised it's coming out of the pot. When it was smaller, when it was about a year old, it was quite nice. So again, when I realised I was giving this talk tonight, I found another one and planted it. It doesn't look as nice as it should, but it's over next to one of the trees over there. So there's sort of nothing sacrilegious about what you can use for a Zoe. That's not quite right for a Zoe, but I thought it looked quite nice in a little pot anyway. And one of the unusual plants I brought tonight is some bamboo, which I have brought in the past. It's quite unusual, but it looks nice, and it's even got a little Zoe with it. You can have little trees. This is a 5-year-old Port Jackson fig, and I know that Chris specialises in keeping figs small, but it's quite a cute little tree. So you could have a mame as an accent plant in the right circumstance. I'm not sure. You heard me say about the 2 trees. I'm not sure I would want a little Port Jackson fig as a Zoe to a big Port Jackson fig, but it might look okay with something else, an azalea or something. And here is another little azalea. And this is a little plant. I don't know what it's called. I was going to check my online identifier to see what it's called, but I bought it because it's quite a pretty little plant. It grows and spreads like wildfire, and my biggest problem now is getting rid of it. It grows to about that high if you let it, and you get about 20 or 30 of these plants cropping up per square foot all around it. But while it's little like that, it's very pretty, and I thought it made a nice accent plant. We're going to get a demo in a minute on how to create a Zoe. And while I would have said it's pretty easy, you just find something growing in the garden that you don't want to grow in the garden and put it in a pot. The biggest challenge I find is finding little pots. That's quite a nice little pot, but it's a butter dish from some restaurant. I had to put a hole in the bottom of it, but there's no end of imagination. These are little, what's the Japanese drink called? Sake. That's a set of a sake glass cup set, but I put a hole in this one so that it can grow stuff.
So you got a habit of going to bars and restaurants and taking things.
People take matchsticks.
Look, I take chopsticks, I take butter dishes, whatever. This is a really cute little dish, which was a little, one of the things I look for when I go to bonsai sales is little pots. And you can usually get them pretty cheap. I guess they're embarrassed to charge too much for a tiny little thing like that, and I can't remember what I paid for this. But that's a genuine little pot. Probably intended for a mame or whatever. Is there a smaller size than mame? There is, but I don't know what it's called. But it's a cute little pot. And what I find is I never have any spare ones because every time I get a new little pot, I put something in it. And so in terms of displaying them, they could have their own stand. I think some of the Zoes in these pictures have their own little stands. So you could have a little stand like that. It would have to match the other stand, or you could just have a little mat for it to sit on. And again, this is probably a coaster from some restaurant. Or you could have a little dish for it to sit in. I find really the only limitation with Zoes is your imagination.
What you can put in your pocket.
That's another advantage
So it is done that
having little ones. It's interesting that at the Royal Easter Show where they should have Zoes, they don't, and I suspect the reason, you may know, Chris, is that they're too easy to steal.
Well, it happened to Brenda. God rest her
Well,
soul.
it happened to Sue as well.
Sue.
But it wasn't a Zoe.
Yeah.
It was a little mame.
Yeah, a little mama with a stand and a pot.
Yeah,
And they took it.
They all took it from that point.
yeah.
She
So
electrocuted it.
on that fabulous note, what we might do is hand over to Ollie to show us how to make one.
I just add that the Zoe is always put in the direction that the tree is growing. You can see it on the slides up there.
Yeah.
It's always because it's they're kind of forming a relationship between the two.
Yes.
So it always goes, because I guess I say that mainly because I've been caught on other places and have been told, no, it goes in the direction of the tree.
I arrived early tonight to work out how to use the projector, and the lady that I asked said, it's very easy, just plug your computer in and it comes up. And I came in and tested and got it working on this one, but I didn't know how to get it working on all the others. It just does. So we could have had some pictures in the basic training class. We'll think about it next time, Ollie.
Thank you, John.
All of you here. This is probably one of those things that if you want to come watch, I think come in a bit closer, come have a look. If you want to work on trees because it's quite small, refined. I'll sort of show it as a big whole, but once I sort of start working, I'll kind of let you go. And I've actually got a juniper here. If someone wants to take the lead and have some fun with it, preferably someone who knows what they're doing. But you can sort of chat with each other, and if you want to look at that, go for gold, that doesn't why you can.
There's another presentation.
Oh, is it? Okay, no worries.
You need to let me know when you finish.
Okay, right. Well, I'll start on this. I'll kind of get most of the way through, and then I'll.
Do you want us to come and watch?
Yeah, I'll start back for a sec. But basically, what we're making is moss fern on a rock, right? So
You got the Japanese term for it?
So all it is a piece of scoria, like a big piece of lava rock. You get it from any sort of aquarium store. I think they sell them about $10 a kilo, so I think that was about $1 for that rock. There's a place in Alexandria I got it from. I kind of took all the good sized ones, and maybe wait a few weeks. The fern is what I believe is a water fern. Can't quite remember the type. I bought it off tree makers over in the Blue Mountains. And then the moss that is on that one is just some garden moss, but I've actually got Chris to bring in some different types of moss here, which are much better suited. And it'll actually I'll be able to explain it a little bit better with bigger moss. So I guess the whole explanation really is how do you get it to all stay together, and I guess why. The big thing is that, where do you see moss? You either see it on the concrete in the middle of the city, on the south-facing wall, or you see it on rocks that are hiding underneath, and there's a lot of moisture around. Most important, really, with moss is actually humidity, because they're not taking up water through the base. So the rhizoids that attach themselves to the surface will need moisture to do so. And Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong. But they're actually absorbing moisture through the air. So when you water moss, it's actually not watering it. If you can keep it in a humid environment, that's what's actually keeping it alive and keeping it growing. So when I'm keeping this at home, I've actually got it under very light grow lights at the moment, and then inside a fish bowl, which I found off the side of the street, and some wet rocks, and just spraying it every few days or so. So just trying to keep the humidity up, but also keep the rock nice and moist. So if anyone's used scoria in their bonsai mix, you'll know that water runs off it, so that won't stay moist for a long amount of time, using the word moist a lot. So basically, now I don't have any sterilizing stuff here because I forgot to bring it. But what you want to do before doing any of this sort of work, because you're keeping it in a humid, perfect environment for any sort of fungus to grow, is you want to sterilize all your tools, and also when you get your fern, you want to absorb it. You want to put it in some mixture of fungicide and water as well beforehand, just to try and clean it as much as you can. It's not going to be perfect. You may have to spray some fungicide, but just be light, because ferns and moss can be quite they can react quite poorly to strong fungicide. So if you put like liquid copper at full concentrate, you'll probably kill a lot of ferns, unfortunately. So what you do to start off is, and if anyone else wants to come up here and do one as well, I've got another rock.
Maybe if we do that in the workshop.
No worries. All right. You're going to start off with your soaked lava rock. So this has been soaking for about half an hour, but you probably only need about 5 minutes. You're going to take, and this is probably better where it come closer for anyone that really wants to. So you're going to take some roots here off this. Now, ideally, you do this before the so that one looks alright. I'm probably going to make a bit of a mess of it, but probably this.
Looks like a weed.
This is a continental parsley.
I think that's a weed.
Yeah.
That's a weed on top. But
Is it moss? Really?
yeah, no, the one on top is not. It's growing. I'm going to use this. Right, so anyone wants to see? You've got a tiny little fern with roots. Ideally, you want to clean as much as you can off it.
Looks invaluable.
Pretty straightforward.
I mean, they do become possessed.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
That's what I've taken out of my pot of. And the whole idea here is we're not going to have any soil underneath. Now you can drill a hole out of the bottom, put soil, plonk it in there. It'll probably grow a lot easier. But if you're growing it in a terrarium environment where it's going to be moist quite a lot, you just want to be able to put it on the rock and let the roots take ownership and hold on to the rock. But again, if you are going to keep this outside, you're probably better to have a hole in the rock and just have a bit of soil in there.
So, Ollie, why have you got elastic bands around the other one?
Because there's no soil. So
Right.
at the moment, the roots haven't clung to the rock, so we've got elastic bands on there just so that
Hold it.
there is something holding on. Exactly right.
Hold it while
So-
it grabs.
So if we
Hold
look,
it while it grabs.
Yeah.
So,
so if we look like this
yeah.
at the
It's all
moment,
string, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some twine or something.
you want to find which way do you like? You want it to be able to sit
Now, yeah, able to sit so you can balance.
like that. That's fine. So put it on top. Add some rubber bands. Doesn't have to be super pretty as long as it's roughly holding on. You kind of want to spray the roots out as much as you can, and that's just so that you've got a bit of a place for the moss to actually hold on to. All
That is
right.
moss. That is a moss.
There's moss.
Yeah.
All right. So at the moment we've got it like that. In about 2 months' time of spraying this, and the roots have taken ownership, and the moss is actually the rhizoids have actually grown out and have stuck themselves to the rock, and you can just cut the rubber bands off. And
Just a question. If you put moss on top of the root,
Yep.
okay, like dress it up like that,
Yep.
and then put the rubber band around it, does not make it.
it can
Bit
work.
more-
So, but the whole thing there is the rhizoids at the moment are stuck to the dirt.
Yeah.
Right. So in this scenario, so there's two fields of thought. You can do it that way as well.
Yeah.
It works better if you've got more of a flat surface. But if you've got a surface like this where over time the dirt is just going to drip off,
Right.
the rhizoids aren't actually holding onto the rock. So is that the right word? Rhizoids? Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, we want to try and get it so we've just got rhizoids attaching themselves, which is why it takes a bit of time in a humid environment. So it's sort of a more complex way to go, but after 2 months or so, you've got a much more clean, firm, no dirt underneath, no gap between the moss and the rock. It's very naturalistic, I guess, the best way to put it.
So when you put the moss on the rock, you press it down onto the rock and
No.
try to make it as
Yeah, so
tight as possible?
So what I was saying, so if you've got a flat rock, you probably could just, as James said, just take the moss and just put it on, leave it there, it'll probably be fine. But if you've got a surface like this, it's quite difficult. And if you press it on again, it's going to damage the moss. It's going to look gross. We actually want a very dirtless, just moss on rock environment. And this is again more the terrarium style of keeping it. If you're going to keep it outside, I haven't tested, but it's probably better with a little bit of dirt. So the fun part is putting all the moss on. Now, I'll probably do this to the side because it's very boring watching me with tweezers putting it on. But if anyone wants to see with the moss, what we're going to do is we're going to cut off all the dirt on this side, and wherever it's sort of darker in colour, and we want the lightest possible stuff on top, and we're just going to wedge that in all into the roots that we've sprayed around the rock, and over a couple of months it'll grow into the rock and be secured.
So do you wait until the roots have taken before you do that, don't you?
No, so you're doing all this now, like we're
Oh,
doing all
you're
now.
doing all that,
Yep.
okay.
And then in a couple of months is when we take the rubber band off, and it should be where you can pull the moss and you go, oh shit, it's actually stuck like a lichen on there.
Okay.
So do you need to like keep watering it? Like
Yeah, so
or do you leave it soaking in
great question.
water?
So you don't want it where it's a swimming pool in here because there's just too much moisture. You don't need it. You want to keep the rock moist so that the rhizoids are trying to grow and attach themselves to the rock. If you imagine under a waterfall or something like that where it's moist and there's always moss growing, you've got to create an environment that it would be in nature, if that makes sense. And then from there, all you're trying to do is make sure that the rock isn't drying out. So you're spraying when you look at the rock and you go, oh, it's going to be a little bit dry. A couple of sprays, that's all you need to do. You don't need to overdo it. I think, if you overwater, you'll probably just ruin it.
So you wouldn't leave it in a tray of water.
No, you don't. Well, this is my setup, how I'm doing it. You could probably, I think what Chris has done with this moss is he just put a piece of sandstone in a tray of water and hid it in the corner of his property and let things grow. So this,
Yeah, it wasn't seeded with it. That rock there was just put in a tray like that. And every time I do the bonsai, I just make sure it's got water in it. So it wasn't seeded or anything. Whatever's going to grow there is going to grow there. And it's taken over.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's probably a much easier way to do it. The only thing is that you get less sort of artistic influence, I guess you could say. I mean, you're not going to be able to put ferns into it. It's going to be hard to do that afterwards as opposed to before. So there's good and bad things about everything, I guess.
They were actually done for stands for Zoe's. That was a display stand, that rock with the moss all grown over it, then you put your tree on top of that. Makes a mess of this table, but
Looks good. Instead of using moss, could you use lichen?
I've never worked with lichen. I would imagine it's quite difficult.
It seems to grow readily around solar panels.
Okay, perfect.
they've got lichen growing on seeds.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, no, look, I've never worked with lichen. I don't know why it's really hard. I just imagine it would be.
You need rainwater for the lichen.
Okay.
Finger that around.
Otherwise, it just dies from the chlorine and stuff.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you can't use tap water for the entire thing.
I'd also add that LD have often, like every so often, for about $10, sell ferns on rocks.
Okay.
You could then add
Cheated.
the moss. Yeah, you can cheat. But basically, it's in a little bonsai pot that it's glued in, and it doesn't necessarily look that great. You might have to, break it off, and whether you want to. They're usually about 15, 20 centimeters high, with either a umbrella plant or a fern.
Yeah.
on top.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, and that's the thing is, and what John's shown as well is there's sort of, well, your oyster, do it how you want. I'm showing you one way of doing something. There's you could put lichen on it. You could just throw the rock in the corner and see what grows. There's no right way. You've got creative control. Yeah, I mean, brilliant. I mean, I'm going to try a couple of these things. So thanks for reaching out. But, yeah, I'm going to do the moss on the side because it's very boring to watch. If anyone really wants to do it themselves this evening, I've got some ferns and whatnot. You can have some fun. So it'd be great. But, yeah, that's it. Nothing special.
Thank you, Ollie.
Thank you. One more short presentation. Preparing trees. Yeah, I saw that. Because how many people here have lived in the Northern Hemisphere? A few people. Anybody who's lived in the northern hemisphere, and I don't mean Ceylon, but in the true northern Europe or northern United States areas, that's where you know what winter is. I lived in Munich for 2 years as part of my work about 30 years ago, and we had moved in to the place we were living in January, and it was snowing a fair, not constantly. There wasn't snow on the ground, but it snowed enough to be interesting to our kids because they'd never seen snow. And my wife thought that the best way of getting rid of the snow on the path was to throw hot water on it. And, and that's what she did. So anybody who's lived in the northern hemisphere finds that quite funny because all you do is create a sheet of ice. And when I started thinking about winter in Sydney, it's a sort of a similar thing. We don't have winter in Sydney, so why the hell do you have to prepare for it? And the answer is, that's right. I was reading other clubs' newsletters. There's South Yarra, no, not the Yarra Valley, Canberra, the Nepean Club that meeting in the Lower Blue Mountains are all talking about how to protect their trees from frost. Well, we don't have to worry about that. And while I did work out how to connect the computer, the lead isn't, the cord's not long enough for me to have it over here, so I'm sorry that I have to keep these. I thought it was pretty good that after only 2 meetings I worked out how to plug the computer into the imagine what we'll be able to do in 2 or 3 more meetings. So these are the things that some people have to worry about: frosts, sub-zero temperatures, and anybody who watches YouTube or watches YouTube bonsai videos on YouTube and watch the people in Canada, for instance. There's a guy whose name escapes me at the moment, who's very popular on YouTube, who has a glass house so that he can put the trees that are frost intolerant in the glass house to save them freezing over winter. We don't have that problem. We do have long wet periods, and we do have pest diseases, so there are some things that we can talk about. So just to move along. There are some things that we, even in Sydney, have to do coming into winter. And I realised on the way here tonight, winter is only 2 weeks away. Did you realise? Mm-hmm. In some parts of the world, that means getting ready, making sure your snow tyres are okay, turning off the outside taps in the house, things that we never have to worry about here. But one of the things that, if you read the things to do for the next month in the newsletter, you'll realise that for the last 3 or 4 months I've been saying make sure you continue to fertilise your trees through autumn. Very important. So you can, deciduous trees, once they lose their leaves, then there's no point in fertilising anymore. But up until the end of autumn, and that's always a bit of a question. I remember in Scott Martin's latest podcast, he reckons he can tell which day it is, the day that certain seasons start where he lives. Well, I challenge him to do the same thing in Sydney because you can get autumn going on into winter for some time. However, for deciduous trees, once they lose their leaves, or mostly have lost all their leaves, there's no point in fertilising anymore, and that's usually around about the same time for other species. Watering is really interesting, especially for the last couple of weeks. It's not so much watering as how do you stop it from watering. The thing about all watering is that once the tree goes dormant, it is not going to take up any more water, so there's no point in watering it. Of course, in Sydney, when it rains, you don't have any choice. So the question might be how to stop it getting too much water. If you have a good draining bonsai mix, it shouldn't be a problem because the soil should drain. But I noticed that some of my good draining soils after 2 weeks of solid rain are very, very soggy. Now, the ideal amount of dampness for any tree at any time of the year is when it's just damp to the touch. If it's more than that, then you simply need to be a bit careful, because you will get root rot if the soil remains wet. I've never had root rot, I don't believe. I think it's pretty hard in Sydney, because see, deciduous trees, in winter, unless you've sort of got them in a very wet environment, Sydney is pretty good in that you don't get the environment for root rot, but I've no doubt that if you left the trees in a wet environment, they would get root rot. So you've got to watch out a bit for it. One of the things that I do, if I think the tree is getting too wet, or if the pot needs repotting but it's the wrong time of the year for that particular tree, is to poke a chopstick or a Phillips head screwdriver into the soil, creating more air and helping the drainage and the aeration a bit, and I think that helps. Otherwise, watering in winter in Sydney is a case of putting the tree in the right sort of place so that it doesn't get overly wet but doesn't dry out completely. There are things that will cause moisture in the soil which you should be wary of, and removing organic matter off the top of the pot is important, because not just does it help retain water, but it also helps retain other things, spores, mildew and other fungi, which can be detrimental. So keep the pots clean. And if you keep moss on the tree, and I quite like moss on the tree, I tell people I give trees to that if they can keep the moss alive, the tree's got a chance. But in winter, it might be better, particularly for a deciduous tree, to take the moss off, because it will stop air getting into the soil, and it might keep the soil a bit more damp than you would really want it. So you might think about removing moss on deciduous trees over winter. It's pretty easy to replace when you get past winter.
John?
Yes?
Like, I don't know, maybe you know, how you remove the moss off the tree?
Scrape it.
Yeah.
We've got moss here. It's very easy to get off.
Toothbrush.
Toothbrush?
You're talking about off a tree?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you say, before winter, just remove it.
Toothbrush. Don't throw away an old toothbrush. They're invaluable bonsai tools. You might need a little bit of water. I've heard that a dilute solution of vinegar helps get rid of the moss, but I've never had to use it. I find if you spray the area with a little bit of water and then scrub it with your toothbrush, it will get rid of the moss.
Moss grows all the way up the tree.
Yeah, mine does too. I've got a pond, and I put bonsais around the pond, and it's continually damp, and the moss just goes right up the trunk. But,
you showed it last, I think, when you were showing the images, the one that's on
the best idea when you remove it off the trunk is to also remove it for about 2 or 3 centimetres away from the trunk. It'll grow back very quickly, but if you keep that area around the trunk free of moss, that's better for the trunk. Some species have softer bark than others, and if you get a soft bark tree with moss on it, it can rot the bark very quickly. And if you let it go, say, over winter and then look at it again in spring, it could be even too late. It can ring bark the tree, or you can certainly get big dead patches of the trunk because the bark has rotted. But as I say, some species are more prone to that than others. But it's a good idea to keep it off all, even hard bark trees. It doesn't hurt to keep the moss off the bark. These are nice pictures of bonsais. That first one that I showed with the snow on it is actually a tree in Lithgow. I don't know the guy's name, but he posted it on Facebook some years ago. I thought it was one of the best bonsai photos I've ever seen. Some trees in the summer in Sydney will develop mildew, and the species like crepe myrtle and oak, I find, are the worst ones. But you'll get this mildew all over the leaves. And it's really just the high humidity in Sydney. And there's nothing much you can do about it apart from get rid of the mildew. In winter is the best time to do it because the spores will regenerate. And one way of killing the spores is to spray the tree with lime sulphur. I've been doing it for a few years, and it certainly helps. It doesn't completely get rid of the mildew because the spores travel from a long way, but it certainly helps. And it also gets rid of other things. It'll kill quite a lot of insects or insect eggs and things, and quite a lot of disease and pests that you don't want. So the idea is spray the tree, and winter is a good time to do it, and spray it about once a month for 2 or 3 months. Now when you do, for anybody who's ever used lime sulphur, you find that it stains very easily. And it's also not very good for the roots, so you don't want to bathe the roots in it. So cover the soil with newspaper or plastic or something that stops it from getting into the soil. Spray, so you can spray up and under the leaves and all around the tree. You can brush it on, but I found spraying is much easier. And make sure it gets into all the parts of the tree. You should wear protective clothing because, for one thing, if it splashes on you, you'll get stains either on your clothes or your hands, and it takes some washing to get it off your hands, I can tell you.
And it stinks.
And it smells.
Rotten eggs.
It's sulfur dioxide, so
Yeah,
it is. So, but it is very effective. And so lime sulphur is not only used for preserving and colouring wood in sharis and other things, sharis are bare bits of wood, but it's very good for this pest and fungi control. So, and when you do spray, if you haven't discovered this already, wash the nozzle of your spray out. Get the bit of hose that goes down in the bottle, put that in clean water and spray with that until all the lime sulphur's gone. If you don't do that, you'll use a new spray every time you do it, which gets tedious. There's not a lot of other stuff, but winter is actually a good time to work on deciduous trees because they don't have foliage. You can see the structure much more easily. However, while you can prune and so on, there are times to do it, and you're probably best not. You can see the structure, but do the pruning towards the end of winter, before spring, rather than in winter. That's just better practice. But wiring is a good time to do it. And also in winter, the tree tends to dry out a bit. It's not going to get very dry, but it dries out a bit. And wiring is easier on wood when it's drier because the wood becomes more pliable. So at any time of the year, it's often a good idea to not water the tree for a couple of days before you wire, and it makes the bending easier. Apart from that, there's not a lot of other effects that we have to worry about in Sydney. We're particularly lucky as bonsai growers in that we have 9 months of the year with sunshine. 3 months is a little bit cool, but it's not really the same sort of conditions that they have in the Northern Hemisphere. So unless anybody's got any questions or other things that I haven't thought of for winter, that's it. Any questions? Thank you.
I think one thing with that in mind, sorry, Justin, is whilst we have amazing weather for growing trees, there is also downsides in terms of there are some trees that just don't grow yet. So spruce, for example, which need a really dormant winter, you can't grow here. It's just not worth the time. I know Neville was talking to me earlier about he really struggled with maples. It depends on your little tiny climate that you have at your house as well. I get a lot of hot winds, so I've noticed that hornbeams are awful where I am. Maples really struggle as well. It's just the wind is just too hot. So yeah, while there's a lot of positives and we can grow a lot of trees really quickly, just keep in mind, don't push nature where it doesn't want to go.
I have a lot of trouble not getting windburn on all my maples and trident maples.
Yeah, okay.
I'm in admiration of Mabuni because she still manages to grow beautiful maples that are still without sunburn, in late summer.
Shade cloth.
I don't know how, well, probably. She probably does something like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, any other questions? Okay, well, we'll get in the workshop part. What I'll ask is that we use this dance floor part to do the work. It'll be easier to clean up afterwards. So we'll move these tables around. And if you want to bring a chair and work at these tables, I'll get rid of all of these. Okay?